My name is Faith Vandiver, and the presentation that I'm going to do today is as if I were a student in my class who had been given the assignment to pick a person from our local Charlottesville history who was enslaved before the Civil War and trace their story from enslavement to freedom to their life after the Civil War. I chose to do the man Fountain Hughes, and I really enjoyed following his story. He has a very unique story. He was born in 1848, approximately, into slavery in Charlottesville, Virginia, and he was freed in 1865 after the Civil War. Now, what makes his story especially interesting is that he was found by something called the Federal Writers Project, where the federal government sent out people to find former slaves and record their oral histories. And he is one of 26 former slaves who were found and had their oral histories recorded. And his interview was in June of 1949. And so if you go to the Library of Congress's website, the World Digital Library specifically, you can actually find an audio account of his interview. You can also go to the Monticello website and you'll find him there as well, because he is a descendant of the slaves who were enslaved at Monticello. Fountain talks about what it was like to grow up as a slave in Charlottesville. And I'm going to play a clip of him describing how different it was from childhood in slavery and childhood after slavery.
Now, in my boy days, boys live quite different than the way they live now. But boys wasn't needed now either. Boys lived they had a good time. The masters didn't treat them bad. And they was always satisfied. They never wore no shoes until they were 12 or 13 years old. Now people put on the shoes on babies, when they're month old, I'll be young and old. Put shoes on babies, just as soon as you see them out in the street, they got shoes on. I told a woman the other day, I said, I never had no shoes till I was 13 years old. She said, well, but you bruise your feet all up and stump your toes. I said, yes, many times I've stumped my toes and blood run out of them. That didn't make them buy me no shoes. And I've been, you wore a dress like a woman till I was 10, 12, 13 years old.
So you wore a dress, so?
Yes, I didn't wear no pants because they didn't make boys' pants. Boys wore dresses. Now the women's wearing dresses and the boys are going with the women's wearing the pants now and the boys wearing the dresses. Still.
Fountain talks about his life as a child in slavery. He says that he had no shoes until he was 12 or 13. He wore dresses until he was about 13 and did not wear pants. He was not allowed to have books. He was not allowed to go to school. He didn't have a mattress to sleep on. He just had a pallet on the floor. He said that when he was sent as a messenger from place to place, he had to have a pass to show his allowance to travel. And he said when it was time to harvest the tobacco, that you had to work all night, that you had to cut the tobacco, hang the tobacco, and you don't get to say if you're tired or not. When asked about his life as a slave by the interviewer, he said he would rather die, shoot himself, than to go back to slavery. Fountain describes this historical site in Charlottesville in his interview. This is a historical site in the middle of Court Square in Charlottesville. It's just a simple marker in the ground that says Slave Auction Block. On this site, slaves were bought and sold. And you'll notice that it faces the courthouse right across the street. And this is what Fountain had to say about this site. He said that there was an auction block that was called a bench. He said that at auctions they would beat on you, the slaves, and they would sell you for $200, $100, or $500. He said that he was never sold because he was too young to sell. He said that slaves who misbehaved were sent to jail centers, and that really bad slaves were shipped down south by what he called nigger traders. So that's right here at this site. Now, Fountain Hughes goes on to say that his father died during the Civil War. And we know that at this courthouse right across the street, that 940 enslaved men were brought to be evaluated by a doctor. And if they wouldn't come of their own accord, they would be brought by gunpoint. And the doctor would decide if they were fit enough to serve. And they would be impressed to work for the Confederate Army. And they would do things like cook, make weapons and shoes. They would dig trenches. They would do laundry. They did all of the manual labor for the Army. And I believe that Fountain Hughes' father was one of those men who was impressed into service during the Civil War. And Fountain says that he was killed and he didn't come back. Fountain also talks about his master during the Civil War. He says that his master couldn't find a substitute for him. So a lot of men who were wealthy, plantation owners, would hire somebody to go fight for them when they were drafted into the Confederate Army. And Fountain says that his master couldn't find someone like that. And so he says that his master ran away and died. Fountain also talks about what it was like when the Yankees came to town. He talks about what they did in Charlottesville when they came. So I'll let you listen to his account of that.
No, I don't remember much about it.
You're a little young then, I guess. Huh?
I remember when the Yankees come around and took all the good horses and took all the, sold out all the meat and flour and sugar and stuff out in the river and let it go down the river. And they know the people wouldn't have nothing to live on, but they done that. And that's the reason why I don't like to talk about it. And people, and if you was cooking and eating that for yourself, and if they was hungry, they could go and eat it all up, and you get nothing. They'll just come in and drink up all your milk, you know. Just do as you please. Sometimes you'll be passing by all night long, walking, mudding, ringing, all that other kind of thing.
So Fountain talks about how the Yankees took the good horses, they threw the flour, sugar, wheat out in the river so people couldn't have anything to eat, that they would drink the milk, and that they would pass all night long. Fountain also talks about what it was like when he was freed. He talks about how he was turned out like a cattle without a pasture. I'm just going to play that clip as well for you.
Now, after we got free, then they turned us out like cattle, and we didn't have nowhere to go. And we didn't have nobody to boss us. And we didn't know nothing. And there wasn't no school. And when they started the little school, the people that were slaves, there couldn't many of them go to school, except they had a father and a mother. And my father was dead, and my mother was living. And she had 3, 4 other little children. She had to put them all to work to help take care of the others. So we had what you call horse and dogs. We got it now. The dogs have got it now better than we had it when we come along. I remember one night I was out after I was free, and I didn't have nowhere to go. I didn't have nowhere to sleep. I didn't know what to do. My brother and I was together. So we knew a man that had a living stable. And we crept in that yard and got into one of the hacks of the automobile and slept in that hack all night long. So next morning, we could get out and go where we belonged. But we were afraid to go at night because we didn't know where to go and didn't know what time to go. But we had got away from that and we were afraid to go back. So we kept sleeping in that thing all night until the next morning, and we got back where we belonged before the people got up. As soon as they come out and break, we got out and come out to go where we belonged. But we never done that but the one time. After that, we all day away, we try to get back before night come. But that was on a Sunday too, that we done that. Now, when we were slaves, we couldn't do that. See? And as we got free, we didn't know nothing to do. My mother, she hunted places and bound us out for $1 a month. And we stayed there maybe a couple of years. She'd come over and collect the money every month. And $1 was worth more then than $10 is now. And the men used to work for $10 a month, $120 a year, used to hire that way. Now you can't get a man for $50 a month. If you pay a man now $50 a month, you don't want to work for it.
So Fountain talks about how he was turned out like a cattle in a pasture. He had no home, nowhere to go. He couldn't go to school. There was no school to attend. He didn't have a home or property. His mother was a widow, and she had other little ones to care for. And so he was rented out to work for a sum of $1 a month. And he said that dogs had it better than he and his brother did. And his mother would come at the end of the month and collect the $1 so that she could take care of herself and her other children. He doesn't talk very much about the rest of his life in Charlottesville, but we do know that he moved to Maryland, Baltimore, Maryland, in 1881. So he moved from Charlottesville down here up to Baltimore. And a lot of former slaves did this during what was called the Great Migration. So when he was interviewed in 1949, he had been living in Baltimore for quite some time. One of the things that he closes his interview with is a story about church during the time of being a slave. He talks about how church was held in a log cabin in the woods, and that there would be a preacher as old as he was at the time of his interview that would be there. And they would talk about the Lord, and they would wonder if they would ever be free. And they would ask the Lord if they would be free. They would sing for about an hour, songs like Roll, Jordan, Roll, and By. And he said that Jesus said to make a noise over him. So they would get so happy, they would feel the grace of God, and they would sing for over an hour. And Fountain, at the end of his life, said that listening to hymns on the radio was one of his greatest joys. That when he would feel sad and overwhelmed, he would turn on the radio and he would just let the music wash over him, and that he would feel peace. So that is the story of Fountain Hughes. I hope that you enjoyed it.